There were two men. One was a member of a Protestant denomination, and the other man was a member of a different Protestant denomination. And they were having a discussion about religion. And they couldn't agree. And the discussion basically was bordering on argumentation. And one of them realized that this shouldn't go any further because they'd be mad or angry at each other. And so he said, well, it really doesn't make any difference what you believe. The good people of all churches are going to heaven anyway. He said, beliefs and practice don't count with the Lord. What the Lord wants is for us to be sincere. So one church is as good as another one. Well, that philosophy is very prevalent in the United States today. The only thing that's important is, are you sincere in what you believe? If you are, you're a good person, and the Lord's going to save every good person, no matter what they believe and how they practice it. Today we have a word or words for that. That's called political correctness. Political correctness has gone so far that I read last week of all of the churches in America that are now ordaining homosexuals to positions of leadership. It is a very long list. And the reason for that is just what I described to you a few moments ago. It's not what you teach and believe, it's your sincerity. So if you are engaged in homosexuality, that's all right, if you genuinely believe that that's correct in God's eyes. Political correctness now, my friends, has gone even further in relationship to this country. Most of us realize that in America today, there are many new immigrants. And one of the large immigrant groups coming to America are Muslims. There are a great many Muslims in Minnesota, in the state of Tennessee, and even here in Ohio. So political correctness says they don't worship Christ, they don't believe he's the Son of God, but they're genuine in their belief that Muhammad is the prophet of God, who they call Allah. Therefore, political correctness demands that it doesn't make any difference if they don't believe in Jesus or they don't believe in Jehovah God. They're sincere. So we need to welcome them in to the fold of individuals who are going to heaven. There's a second large group coming into America, and these are the Hindus, the ones primarily from India. And the same principle needs to apply to these individuals who worship idols. And as some of us saw on TV recently, they worship rats in certain parts of India. So political correctness and the idea that they're sincere in their beliefs and they're good people, they're going to go to heaven. In other words, the phrase that's very popular in America in the last few years is that there are many ways to get to heaven. and sincerity tops the list. This also has to be true with Buddhism and the other religions of the Far East. We're here this morning to address a question. And I want to do this in such a way that when the question is raised in your situations with other individuals, that we can turn to the Scriptures and see what they say. Now, before we begin addressing the question, are there many ways to get to heaven? We must understand something. The key to this question is Jesus. If Jesus is not the Son of God, then this question is moot. There's no need for it. Because Jesus is the one who proclaims to us that not only is he is God's Son, but also he is stated emphatically, and his apostles did the very same thing, that there is going to be a judgment day. We cannot deny, and we would be the most foolish of all people if we did, that any of us are going to be here forever. We're going to leave this earth as a young individual or as an ancient person. And Jesus says that's going to happen. The Old Testament writers said that we will be here for 70 years, and if by strength, 80 years. We're going to die. Now, Jesus steps on the scene and gives us a glimpse of what comes after death. There'll be a second return of Christ. There'll be a judgment, he says. And then Jesus proclaims in Matthew chapter 25 and other places that after the judgment, there'll be a division of people. Some into a place of everlasting comfort, we call it heaven, and a place of everlasting punishment. Bottom line, two words we're familiar with, heaven and hell. Now, the question that we're interested in this morning is, are there many roads to this heaven? Or, putting it another way, are there many ways to get to heaven? If you believe in Jesus Christ genuinely, you believe there's a heaven and there's a hell. And no one, I think, of rightful mind and thinking sincerely wants to go to a place of eternal punishment. There are men who say they do, but I don't think they really do. So how do we get to this place of everlasting comfort? Whether we are Americans by birth, immigrants by birth, from different backgrounds, different countries, are there many ways to get to heaven? So if Jesus Christ is the Son of God, let's begin with him. In Matthew chapter 7, in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus is delivering his famous Sermon on the Mount. And in this chapter, he says something that is quite interesting to us in this discussion. Are there many ways to heaven? In verse 13, and I'm going to be reading some verses today, quite a few, as time permits. In the 7th chapter, verse 13, Jesus said to those that were listening to him, "Enter you in at the strait gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction." Now we know that destruction there, and everybody who understands Scripture has ever read it. No, we're talking about the place of eternal punishment. "And many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way, which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it." It's interesting here that Jesus is only mentioning two ways. Not two ways to heaven, literally two ways to go after death. The broad way, when I think of Broadway, I think of Columbus and New York and various other cities that have a street named Broadway. But the Broadway street that I most think of is Broadway in downtown Salt Lake City. It is the widest street I've ever seen in my life. If I'm not mistaken, after many years from being there, it's 3 lanes each way in downtown. For the founders of that city wanted to make sure that the streets were wide enough for the wagons. There were many of them in that day. Broadway means a way that's easy to travel. Now, if you want to try a narrow street, go to Philadelphia or go to Hagerstown, Maryland. You can hardly get through the streets downtown. In modern translations of this passage, it says the broad and easy way and the difficult way. Jesus says the way to eternal destruction is broad, easy, and many go in thereat. But the straight and the narrow way is the difficult way, and few enter thereat. I've only had one man in my entire life ask me how many the few were. That was Jack one Sunday. Said, "Vinton, how many are the few?" And I gave him a clear answer. Few. I don't know. And I'd be the most foolish man on earth to say how many the few were. But we understand the concept of few and many. So Jesus is implying, and we'll find out more about what he said in a minute, that those that are going to heaven are going to travel a way that's narrow and difficult. Now, let's turn our attention now to Jesus again. And I want to turn over to, and I'm not going to read it because you know it, to John chapter 3, beginning in verse 16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have life everlasting." In the verses that follow, and I'll make this short, Jesus said, "If you believe in me," and I'm paraphrasing all of it, that's great. "But if you don't believe that I am the Son of God, you are already condemned." So the way that leads to heaven begins with an acceptance of the fact that Jesus is the Son of God. If we accept that fact, we also accept another fact. Jesus is God's only Son. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. Anyone who does not believe that, Jesus says, that man or that woman has already condemned him or herself. Now, we have a lot of folks in this country who acknowledge that Jesus exists on this earth. Some refer to him as the Son of God. Others do not accept him as the Son of God, but call him a great teacher. And there are others that deny Jesus altogether. Jesus said, if you don't believe that I am the Son of God, you've already condemned yourself. You're traveling the broad way. In John chapter 14, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the light. No man cometh to the Father but by or through me. Jesus. Believe it? Son of God? Great. If not, you're putting yourself in a place of condemnation. Now let's move to another part of this question for a moment. What about the idea that all good people, no matter whether they're Muslims or a Protestant denomination or someone else, are going to go to heaven based on goodness? I'm very fortunate, to know a lot of good folks. I am. And I think you are also. But there are two stories in the book of Acts that I want to address this morning quickly. You know these two stories very well. One of them is a Roman citizen, I might add by birth. He didn't pay for it. You know, in Rome you could buy citizenship. But you could be born a Roman citizen. And you were a little bit higher than those that bought their citizenship. He spoke 5 languages that we know of. He was highly educated. And generally, from what we read in Scripture, he was a nice guy. But he was unique in another way. He was a Roman citizen, but he was a Jew. Now, you know how rare that is? To be born a Roman citizen and a Jew at the same time? Remember, all we read in the New Testament is that the Jews hate the Romans. Unique. And as a Jew, he was a conservative Jew. With the word very in front of it. And when as a young man, Jesus had come to this earth and had lived in Jerusalem and the area of Palestine, and when he was crucified, his followers started teaching what we commonly today call Christianity. And he decided, being a good Jew, that he needed to put down this false religion. And so, according to his own account, he had Christians arrested. By the way, these are Jewish Christians. He had them arrested, and when it was brought to the attention of the Jewish officials that they were Christians violating what they considered to be the law of Moses, he gave permission to have them put to death. You know I'm talking about Saul of Tarsus. And then the Lord appeared unto him on the Damascus road. And you know the rest of the story. He became a Christian and gave the rest of his life to the promotion of Christianity. Now, the Jews of that time didn't call Saul of Tarsus a bad man, did they? He's a good one. But Saul of Tarsus learned on that dusty road going to Damascus that he wasn't in a saved relationship with the God of heaven. But let's look at another case, even more vivid. This man's a Roman too. As far as we know, he's a born Roman. By birth, he's an Italian. He's official, or an officer, I should say, in the Roman army. One of the great studies that sometimes individuals can make is a study of who was in the Roman army. And you know, a lot of the common ordinary soldiers in the Roman army, some of them were convicts, some of them were captives, but the men who were the officers were instructed to, and they did very fully, provided the strictest of all discipline. Discipline in the Roman army is not the kind of discipline that would be practiced in any American army. It was violent. And when you were an officer in the Roman army and you were given a particular command in perhaps Greece or in England or in Palestine, you kind of ruled with an iron hand. And you did not respect the wishes of the general population.
This is the end of part 1.